Welcome everyone to the Accounts Payable training session number 2. In this training session, we'll continue discussing the Accounts Payable module and the advanced options on how to continue using and utilizing the AP module. This session is intended for any Aria new users, the Accounts Payable staff, and the accounting department. The class prerequisite is to have attended the previous accounts payable session number 1, as well as to have a knowledge of the vendor's master file discussed in the PO3 course or material. This course outcome at the end of this class will learn how to approve for payments by batch using or approving different invoices in a batch. We'll use how to record a payments using different options like the manual check payment, cash payment, or non-check payments. We'll learn how to print checks from Aria directly using your pre-printed format or your pre-printed paper checks. We'll learn how to apply debits against open payable invoice, and we'll learn how to void payments when needed. And finally, we'll discuss the accounts payable different reports, and we'll focus on the key reports to use within the accounts payable module. Okay, so we'll start today with the first topic of how to approve payments in batch. First, go to Transactions main menu, go to Accounts Payable module, and then select Approve for Payment option. As we learned in the previous session, we discussed how to approve one invoice at the time from the Payable invoice screen. So today we'll learn the more advanced option to approve payables in batch using a selection criteria, as we'll see. So the first screen is simply to let you decide the selection criteria of how to select your payable invoice, how you would like them to be sorted out, like sorted by invoice or by vendor number. If you would like to filter or to sort out the payables using a specific payment priority, invoices that fall within a specific invoice due date, invoices that have a specific reference number for a specific vendor, and so on and so forth. So let's say I would like to approve payable invoices that fall within the month of February. So I'm going to put that as my criteria. So from the beginning of the month to the end of the month. And I would like to approve only the invoices that are posted for a specific vendor. Let's say I want all the payable invoice for United Apparel as my vendor. So I'm going to check that off and apply the selection to narrow down the search criteria only for that vendor for the invoices that fall within the specified due date. Once I select my criteria, I click the OK, the green check mark, and that will simply list all the invoices that match or that list the search criteria that I select. So let me just redo the criteria to select a wider range of invoices. So let's say I want to select the invoices available for United Apparel, no matter what's the due date. So I want to approve invoices in a wider date range or by vendor. So once I apply my search criteria, the system will search and will give me all the invoices for United Apparel for the vendor code that I selected. It will be sorted normally by invoice number, and I will be able to see here all the details about this invoice, like the invoice amount, the payment method that I selected, the invoice date, the invoice due date, and all the header details or all the header information about this invoice. So now simply you can have one of these options down there. You can either approve fully the current invoice, or you can approve it partially. You can approve all, so that will simply approve all the invoices within this criteria. And as a reverse function, I can choose to disapprove all if it's approved by mistake and I would like to undo the approval. So let us see what each option is doing. Approve fully will simply take the current invoice that I am highlighting and it will approve the total amount after any discount. Then I can repeat the same. I approve fully the next invoice. If I choose approve partially, that will open up another window for me to let me select the bank, the checking account, and the actual amount that I would like to approve. So here, if I want to approve 700 out of the 750, that will be the amount to approve or approve to pay, and that will be a partial approval, and thus the payment will be partially done within the approved amount. So you keep repeating until you approve the entire invoices that you would like to approve in this session. And as we mentioned, you can either choose to approve fully or approve partially. If you satisfied with your selection criteria and you would like to approve the entire invoices in that range, you can simply in one click you can choose approve all, and that will approve the entire invoices and attach or select the proper bank and checking account to be associated with the payment record for these selected invoices. So once you are done with the approval, you save your changes. So this way it's a final, it's saved in the database, and the approved amount that you selected are now saved and associated with each invoice. So now our next topic, after we approve the invoices for payment, we'll discuss our payment options and what are the different payment methods available in Aria in the accounts payable, and how to use each one of these types of payments according to the selected payment methods that we assigned on the invoice and that we approved the payable invoice to use. So let's go back to the Aria interface. From the same accounts payable, under transactions main menu, accounts payable, payments submenu, we'll have the different types of payment that we can use to post a payment to one of the approved invoices that we have approved in step number 1. So we can post a cash payment, we can post a manual check payment, or we can post a non-check payment. Those are typically the 3 different payment methods that you can use to pay an approved payable invoice, depending on the payment method selected. Let us see cash payment. Cash payment is simply if you pay directly from your petty cash or from your safe box. So you can use that option whenever it's a small amount or whenever you apply a small payments to a certain type of expenses and payable invoice. The screen works as usual, like in the approve for payable. It works by selecting a criteria. The criteria could be the payment priority, the invoice due date, the reference, or the vendor code. So let me select by vendor code. So I'm gonna select United Apparel as my vendor. Then when I click OK button, the system will search and see if there is any open invoices matching the selected criteria. If not, it will give me a warning message, and that indicates that there is no payable invoices have been approved for that selected payment method. So let us try another type of payment. Let us try manual check payment. So the same exact interface, you start first by selecting your criteria by priority, by invoice due date, or by vendor. So I can always put question mark and that will open up the vendor list for me. So I'm gonna select my vendor that I have some payable invoice approved for. And here the payment method, since I am in the manual check payment, the payment method selected is manual checks. Finally, I can select or modify the default bank and the default checking account to issue the check or to withdraw the check from. So all these are set up as default as we saw in the previous session. If I am satisfied with that selection, I can just confirm and click OK. And here the system will simply scan all the approved payable invoices for United Apparel as my vendor and for payment method manual checks. So it will list me all the invoices that my criteria that fulfills my search criteria. And here I can simply select one or multiple invoices to be paid during that payment session. Once you select and you finalize your selection of your payable invoice, you click on Pay Selected Invoice. Here it will be the final confirming step to post the payment. This is the amount approved to pay. This is the payment date when the payment record will be posted as of. And the check number will simply reflect your manual check number on your paper checkbook according to your manual paper form. So it's always a good practice to make sure your system Aria check number matches your paper check number. This way, for cross-reference, you can always refer to the same check number that you have on the printed check form. Once you are done with confirming the payment date and the check number as well as the approved amount to pay, you click proceed, and that will clear up or will clear out the invoice from the list, meaning that has been approved, and I can repeat the same process for as many invoices as I want. Once I click save modifications, the payment record will be saved. The related invoice will be marked as paid, either partially if I approve the invoice partially, or if it's approved fully and paid fully, so the entire invoice amount will be paid and the whole invoice will be closed. Finally, the last payment option that we have in this menu is the non-check payment, and the screen works pretty much the same like the cash payment and the manual check payment. The only difference that the payment method would be in that case non-check payment. Non-check payment can be used for any other payment types like wire transfer, electronic funds transfer, any other payment other than the cash payment and the check payment in general. You can use the non-check payment. Same exact interface, you can select your criteria by invoice due date, by vendor code, or by payment priority. Then you confirm the payment method that you would like to search or to apply for these approved invoices. You confirm your bank and checking account selection, and you click the OK check mark to search for the related invoice. So let me first go and approve some payable invoice using that payment method. So I'll go back to approve for payment. I'll search for my vendor code United Apparel, and I will choose payment method non-check payment. So that's a good practice of how to approve for certain payment methods that are pre-selected on my payable invoice. So now I want to approve anything for United Apparel as a vendor and the payment method as non-check payment. So let me see what I will get. So now the payments or the payable invoice that matched my criteria, which is for vendor United Apparel, using a non-check payment method showed up. Now I can approve fully, and once I approve the amount, I will be able to save, close, and now I can go back to the payment menu, accounts payable, payments, and non-check payment. Now that the payable invoice has been approved, I should be able to select my vendor code or type my vendor code, confirm my payment method that I would like to use, non-check payment, confirm the bank and the checking account, click OK, and now that payable invoice that match this payment method will show up. I simply need to mark it or check it, and click Pay Selected Invoice. When I click Pay Selected Invoice, the same options that showed up with the manual check payment or cash payment will appear, and I just need to confirm the actual payment date when the date is posted. I put the payment reference number, which could be a check number or a wire transfer reference number, etc. And then I proceed to post the payment. Here there will be a validation if the payment date precedes either or the invoice date or the posting date. So you have to be careful in that case. If the invoice date is in a certain date, we cannot have the payment date prior to that date. So let me just make sure the payment falls after the actual invoice date. Proceed. Okay, so it looks like that invoice date is on June 13, so let me put a date higher than that. Let me put June 14, put the payment or the check number, proceed, and now the payment record is saved, and I can finally click Save to confirm the payment. So what we learned here, that the system validates the payment date against the invoice date. In other words, you cannot post a payment prior to the actual invoice date. So that's a simple validation to avoid mistakes and to avoid posting the payment actually before the payment or before the payable invoice posting date. So in this section we discussed the three different types of payment that are related directly to an approved payable invoice. In the next topic we'll discuss the advance payment, how to issue and post a payment record as an advance payment. In that case, the advance payment is not related to any invoice. As it appears, as self-explanatory from the name, the advance payment is used when you want to pay to your vendor in advance, even prior to the payable invoice is recorded. So advance payment is used generally to record the payment prior to the payable invoice. The same three payment methods are available: cash payment, manual check payment, or non-check payment. And the screen here simply lets you select the vendor code that you would like to pay an advance payment for. You can select or change the bank and the checking account from the bank master list. The related GL account codes for that bank and checking account, as well as the default accounts payable GL account code, will show up based on the vendor setup, of course. And here I have to assign a debit memo number, which typically would reflect the advance payment. I can put any short reference, advance payment for blah blah blah, and I can put the payment amount, how much check payment or non-check payment, depending on the payment method I would like to pay that vendor, and the date when the payment will be posted to the accounts payable onto that vendor account. Remit to is simply the payee name and address. It could be the vendor name and address, or it could be factor, or it could be a third party or a different address to work as the payee or the remittance name and address. So now I'm gonna choose to remit the payment to the vendor name and address. Once you click pay, the system will confirm the advance payment check number. You click proceed, and now the advance payment has been saved. We'll see later during the session how to apply this advance payment later on when you receive the payable invoice. So as of this moment, only the accounts payable has been debited, the vendor account has been debited with this amount, and the bank checking account has been credited with corresponding payment withdrawn from that bank and checking account. Same goes for non-check payment, advance payment, or cash payment. The screens are typically the same. The only difference is the payment method will be saved in the database using the selected payment type. So in the previous topics, we discussed how to approve for payments using several payable invoices. In batch, we discussed the available payment option to either post a payment for a manual check payment, for a cash payment, or for a non-check payment. In the next topic, we'll see how to print a checks out of Aria, and in that case, instead of using a manual check writing and you write the check or you cut the check manually, you can actually print it directly from Aria if you do have the pre-printed check form suitable to work with the system. So in that option, we'll learn how to print checks from the system. Printing checks will actually allow me to have a paper check form printed using my pre-printed checks. In the same time, it will post a payment in the system, a payment record against the approved invoice, and it will mark the invoice as paid. So now we'll discuss how to do that actually in the system to print checks. Printing checks in Aria is available under the output menu, accounts payable, and print checks option. Yep. Then so we'll go to output, accounts payable, and print check. Printing checks in Aria is available for one of these options. I can print checks and post a payment record for approved invoices or for advance payments, or I can reprint an existing check and payment record. So the most commonly used is I want to print checks for an approved invoices. I approve the payables and I would like to run the checks in order to pay the selected invoices. So that's option number one. Other options available in the printing checks functionality, you can print the stub lines, and the stub lines are actually important. As you know, it's that portion of the check that will normally indicate what invoices I am paying within that check. So the stub lines are very important to print. Print check numbers is optional, and here it depends on your pre-printed check form whether it has already its own check number or if you would like Aria to print for you the check sequence number. If you do have the check number already on the printed on the paper form, then typically speaking I would say no, because the check number is actually shown already on your pre-printed paper form. Same goes for print company address, yes or no. If you do not want your company name and address to show or to be printed by Aria, you choose no. If not, if your check form does not have your company name and address and you would like Aria to print it for you, so you choose yes to printing company address. Next is print bank address, and here most commonly if you do have a pre-printed check paper form, normally the bank name and address are already printed on the paper form, so you do not need Aria to print, so that option would be no. Next is the bank and checking account. Like any other payment option, you have to select and confirm your bank and checking account selection that you will withdraw the money from. Check date is the payment date. Next, check number will be suggested by the system. And here is one important tip. Make sure always that if you use a sequential pre-printed form, that the next available sheet in the printer is matching your next check number. This way, in other words, the check number generated in Aria will match your paper check form. Alignment test, that's only if you would like to see a test of how the check will show up. Payment method, in that case, it will be by default selected as a printed check. Then I can narrow down my selection by vendor, by invoice due date, or by payment priority. So let us say I want to print all the approved invoices for United Apparel. So I'm going to select that as the vendor. And for any whatever specific invoice due date or payment priority, so I select that as well. And now I'm done with my selection criteria. I can do one of the following. I can print preview the checks. That will simply be like only a preview on the screen to see how the check look like. If I am satisfied, I can print. I can click the print icon, and that will run the actual check printing, will send it to your paper, print the original copy of the check, and mark the related invoice as paid for the selected vendor and the selected invoice due date. So let me print preview first to see how the check will look like. So this is how the check form will look like. The first portion is the stub, which, as we mentioned, indicate the invoice number or numbers that will be paid within that check. And as you can see, I can consolidate more than one invoice together as long as they are both for the same vendor and selected within the same selection criteria. They can be consolidated together in one check. So I am issuing here one check with 1,393 for two invoices. This is the check portion in the middle. And as you noticed, if you choose to print the company name and address will show up. If not, it will be pre-printed on your check paper form, and Aria will simply only list you or write for you the invoice amount in letters and in numbers, the check date, and the vendor payee name and address. Then finally another check portion, a check stub portion will print. So if I am ready, I can print directly from here, or if I am not yet finalized, I would like to revise my selection criteria, I still can do that as long as I did not press the print button. Once I click the print button, that will be a final step. The checks will be actually generated at this moment, and the related payable invoice will be marked as paid. If any partial payment is done, the invoice amount will be deducted with the portion paid. The check will be printed and the payment record will be posted in the system. So we learned so far how to print checks in Aria for approved invoices, and as we mentioned, printing checks is always a good way to go if you do have a pre-printed check form that matches the Aria format. As we saw, it can print a standard check form with two stubs and a check in the middle. Now our next topic we will discuss is how to apply debits against payables. So as we discussed in the previous session, we saw how to record a debit memo. When I post a payable invoice with a negative sign, that means automatically the system will consider it as a debit memo. So I would like to see how to apply these debits to an existing payable invoice. The same goes if I would like to apply an advance payment as we saw in the beginning of the session, how to apply either advance payment or debit memo against my existing payable invoice. So to do that, I will go to Transactions main menu, Accounts Payable module, and then Apply Debit option. So Transaction, Accounts Payable, Apply Debit. The screen simply asks you first about the vendor code. So I'm gonna select my vendor, United Apparel. Once you select the vendor code, the system automatically will search and list two things. We'll have two lists. The first list will represent the debit memo. The debit memo is open for that vendor, either a debit memo or advance payment, as we mentioned. And the lower list will simply list all the open payable invoices that are approved and waiting to be applied against either a debit memo or advance payment. So if, let us say, the first debit memo, DB debit memo number 1002 with 1250, so I want to make the match. I want to cross-reference this, or I apply it against this invoice. So I simply highlight the debit memo, I highlight the payable invoice, and I click Approve Fully. Apply fully, sorry. So if I apply fully, that means I apply the total amount of the invoice with the related debit memo. So as you can see, once I do that, the open balance of the debit memo as well as the open balance of the invoice will be deducted with the amount applied. Same goes for any other record. If I have an advance payment, let's say with $1,200, and I want to apply this advance payment to that invoice number 222 for $1,500. So in that case, I want to apply partially, so I can click Apply Partially, and here I decide the actual amount out of the payment, how much I would like to apply to that invoice. So let's say I want to apply only $1,000, apply. So now the system automatically recalculate the balance of both the debit memo or the advance payment and the balance of the payable invoice. So if you remember, I had $1,200 of the payment. I applied 1,000, so I still have 200 open, not applied. The invoice was 1,500. I applied 1,000, so I still have open amount 500. Once I am done with the apply debits or apply advance payment, I click Save to finalize the transaction and confirm the balance applied either from the debit memo or from the payable invoice. So our next topic before we discuss the accounts payable report would be how to void a payment. So let us say by accident I recorded a check and I discovered that this check is no good, or I want to undo the check and I still didn't send it out to the vendor, or the paper jammed while I was printing a check and for any reason or another I would like to void that payment and redo it. So all such cases or examples, I would need to void the payment record. To do that, I go to Transactions menu, Accounts Payable module, then Void Payment option. The void payment option is simply let you undo any payment record, whatever, is it a non-check payment, a manual check, or a printed check. Like any other screens in the accounts payable module, you have to select your criteria. The vendor code is a must, the payment method is optional, and the payment date is optional. So I want to select the vendor. I'm gonna tick off United Apparel, and I can narrow down my search criteria by payment method, like printed checks, manual checks, or non-check payment. And I can search or narrow down my criteria for a specific payment date. If not, and if I click OK without specifying any further criteria, the system will give me all available matching payments for the selected vendor. So it tells me here the payment method. How did I pay that specific payment record? Is it a manual check or non-check payment? The payment document number, which could be a check or a wire transfer, payment date, payment amount, and the vendor name. So I simply need to locate the check number or highlight it that I would like to void and click void. System will ask you to confirm. Are you sure you want to void this check number? Yes. If I confirm, then finally when I am done, I'm gonna save, and keep in mind that today's date will be used as the void date. So if you did not override that date, that will be the reverse date or the void date of the check. So it's as simple as that. You can void as many checks as you want and simply highlight the check, click void. Once you void that check that you would like to void, you will save the transaction and all these checks will be so now the selected checks have been voided and the related payable invoice has been opened again with the original amount, or if it was partial paid, it will be reopened with the balance paid on the voided checks. So now we'll move to the last topic in that session, which is to discuss the AP key reports, the important AP reports that you can print out of Aria for the monthly reconciliation process or to keep track of your open payables and aging and so on, as we will see. So all the accounts payable report are available under the output main menu. Then under accounts payable module selection, I will have bunch of reports. We'll start first with the payments and the bank reconciliation, and then we'll see other payable reports as we go. So bank reconciliation report is the most commonly used report to let you reconcile your bank balance and to have a handle on your bank records in and out. So this report comes in two different layout, format 1 and format 2. AR display, if you would like to see the AR checks in summary or in detail, you can choose the mode. You can select by period or by date range, like how you prefer. You can sort the report by transaction date or by transaction number. You can as well select your bank and checking account like usual, and you can choose the reconciliation status that you would like to show up in the report. You would like to see the open transaction, the cleared transaction, or both. So you can simply focus on the transaction status that you would like to reconcile. By default, any transaction, as long as it's not cleared yet from the bank reconciliation, it will be as open, it will be listed as open status. So after you fine-tune your selection criteria, you select by date range, you select the date range that you'd like to see the bank reconciliation and so on. You click print or print preview to see the report. And that will simply list all the ins and outs payments either received or issued from that bank and checking account. It will give you the description of the transaction, if it's a deposit or adjustment, if it's a manual check, if it's a non-check payment transaction, etc. All this will be listed along with the amount of the transaction and the running balance after each and every transaction. So at the end, the total of that report will give you your bank balance for that month or for that period that you select. So that's the very first important AP report, which is the bank reconciliation, to keep track of your bank balance and reconcile either the incoming checks or the outgoing checks, deposit or withdrawal. Next report is located under the output menu, accounts payable, then under payables submenu. And here we have bunch of important reports. The first one is the AP journal. Normally AP journal report is your source AP journal transaction that can list you all the monthly transactions done in AP. So that's a very helpful report to reconcile at the end of the month to list all your transactions by AP account or by expense account. So any kind of detailed reconciliation for your expense account or for your AP account, normally the AP journal report would be a good report to print. Release status here is by default both, meaning that it will show me the AP journal whether it's released to GL or not released. Sorted by, I can sort it by GL account, by transaction, or by invoice, by vendor invoice. I can select also one of two format layouts of that report, form A or B. I can select transaction date, and I can here have one of the pre-selected dates like this month, next month, etc. Then I can narrow down by vendor code, by GL distribution account, or by transaction type. So as you can see here, it's virtually listing all the AP transactions like debit memo, bank adjustment, cash payment, payable invoices, non-check payment, printed checks. So literally any transaction that is done in the AP module, you will be able to see it, to see the detailed journal entry for such transaction. Once you are done with selecting your criteria, you click print preview, and that will search the AP journal records for the selected criteria, sorted by vendor or sorted by the distribution account in the GL as the way that you selected, and it will list me debits and credits for each and every journal entry for each and every transaction. So as we mentioned, the report comes in two different formats, Form A or B. So the same source data, it's just a matter of the layout is a little bit different. So you can select which format you like, and it's more comfortable, and you can use that format. Next report is the aged payable, or what we call it as well, AP aging report. The aged payable report is to give you the current balance by vendor, by invoice, depending on the invoice due date. The report comes in two different formats, summary or detail. Summary is just totals by vendor for the current balance. Detail will list invoice by invoice. So include payments. Normally, if you say yes, the system will automatically check the payment status of the invoice and the paid amount, and it will give you only the open balance depending on the aging date. Aging date is the cut-off date of that report, so as of when you would like to have the balance recalculated for your vendors. Bucket heading, which like any standard aging report, it comes into a standard date buckets like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and 120 days. So it start, locate, and position the invoice based on the due dates and the number of days it's overdue, and it will put the invoice balance under the proper date bucket. Currency, you can, if you have multi-currency selection, you can have, or you can select the currency code that you'd like to print in the report. You can select by vendor, you can select payment method. So all these are typical search criteria. If you want everything, you can just leave it empty, and that means everything will be included. So that's my aged payable invoice summary report. It goes for each and every vendor and it locate or calculate the invoice total and place it under the proper date bucket depending on the invoice due date. So this is my invoice amount, this is the discount if any, and here it locates the amount under the proper date bucket depending on the invoice due date. So if it's still not due as of the report cut-off date, it will show up in the column after the report date. If it's overdue or if it's past due, it will place it under the appropriate date buckets depending on the invoice date and how many days past due the invoice date. As we mentioned, this report comes in two formats, so the detail is simply itemized by invoice number. So instead of seeing only the balance total of the vendor, you can actually drill down to the details and you can see the invoice numbers listed, each invoice, whether it's an invoice or a debit memo. In general, invoices will be positive amount, negative amount are the debit memo, and it will give you the balance for each and every vendor. Okay, so far we discussed the AP journal report, the aged payables or the AP aging. Next important report in the output menu for accounts payable is the approve to pay. Normally you would need to print the approve to pay report every week or before you run the checks or before you post the payment, just to reconcile and verify what you approved is what you really want to pay. So the approve to pay report, as we mentioned, is very important to run before your actual payment or your actual check run. This report is very important to run for a specific bank code or specific checking account, or if not, you can select it by invoice date, by invoice due date, by vendor code, or any other criteria that you are interested to see the invoices approved to pay and ready to be paid. So you select your criteria as usual and you print the report. This report will list only sorted out by vendor, will list all the invoices that are still open but has been approved to pay. So it's a good report, as we mentioned, to reconcile right before you run your checks or right before you post your payment. You print that report to make sure what has been approved is really good to go and it's ready to be paid before you cut the checks or before you run your check run. So that's the approved to pay report. There is other less important reports, but it's good to know, like payable invoice summary report and payable invoice detail report. Those are simply a log of your payable invoice, no matter if it's open or paid or approved. So here the status of the invoice could be open, paid, or all. So if you would like to list all the payable invoice, no matter if it's paid or open, you choose both statuses. You can include or exclude voided invoices. So if just for keeping track of what invoices have been voided, you can choose to display or to omit the voided invoices. You can search by by vendor code, by payment method. You can narrow down your selection by payment priority, and so on and so forth. So all these are selection criteria for you to narrow down your search. You can select for a specific vendor if you want. Then when you print preview that report, it will list all the payable invoices sorted out by vendor code or for the selected vendor code that you selected, and it will give you the original invoice amount, the paid amount, any discount taken, any adjustment, and the open balance. So that's a very helpful report to give you the detail of the payable invoices within a month for a specific vendor, what is open and what is paid so far. So as you can see, it includes both type of invoices, either the one that are paid already in full, partial paid, or still open invoice. Payable invoice detail report is also similar to the payable invoice summary, but it is broken down by the expense account and by the distribution line. So same like the payable invoice summary, you can see open status, paid status, or all invoice statuses. You can exclude or omit or include or exclude the voided invoices. You can search and filter down by payment priority, by vendor code, by payment method, etc., etc. So all these are search criteria that lets you narrow down your search based on the filter by vendor, by payment method, by priority, etc. And then here, once you run the report, it will list you the payable invoice header information as well as the distribution lines. So the difference between the payable invoice summary and payable invoice detail: payable invoice detail lists you the distribution lines, which are the expense account distributed on that payable invoice. So here you can tell if this invoice was distributed to what type of expense. Is it a production? Is it a work in process related expense? Is it a general expense? And so on and so forth, depending on the distribution lines of the invoice. The same like any other report, it will give me a subtotal by vendor, so I can know within the criteria I selected how much was the total payables for that vendor. There is other reports that we may not have enough time to discuss in that session. There is a cash requirement report. There is a discount taken, which lists you the invoice discounts applied to the invoice, and all these reports are available in the accounts payable module output. As we mentioned, the most important report are AP journal, aged payable report, approved to pay, payable invoice summary, and payable invoice detail. So that wraps up our session today, as well as the entire accounts payable module. So to recap, we discussed today and we learned how to approve payable invoice for payments in batch. We discussed how to post payment records using the different payment methods, either by manual check payment, cash payment, or non-check payment. We learned how to print checks and how to use a pre-printed paper format to run the checks and issue checks directly from the system. We learned how to apply payable invoices against a debit memo or advance payment. We learned how to void payment records in case of you want to undo the payment or reverse the payment. And we finally discussed the accounts payable module key report, how to run AP journal, how to run aged payable reports, and how to run the payable invoice and summary, payable invoice summary or detailed report. So that's all for today. Thank you everyone for attending, and talk to you later in future sessions. Thank you.